Hello guys and welcome back. So we're in lockdown 2, 3.0, who even knows, but we're not going to waste any time and we're going to keep going with your GCSE history course. So we are going to start back straight in with the general strike of 1926, one of the last topics we have to cover in Empowering the People. So before we do, let us just remember and cast our mind back to the timeline that has developed with the growth of the trade union movement. So we start off with the medieval guilds, where guilds controlled prices and wages. Then we get down into 1810, where we start to see groups of people destroying machinery as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. We call these people the swing rioters. Now, moving on, because of this chaos that was caused, the government passed the Combination Act in 1825. Now, this defined the rights of trade unions to solely meet for the discussion of wages, and everything else became illegal. If you remember, this was part of the problem for the toll puddle martyrs in 1834. So in 1833, we had the formation of the Grand National Consolidated Trade Union set up by Robert Owen. It had 500,000 members in a week, and it looked to bring workers under one organisation. Remember, this doesn't work because all the different groups had different aims and priorities, and so the one organisation for all did not work. But it definitely shows movement in terms of the willingness of the working class to join trade union movements, and the growth of that, I guess, political body as a representation of this class of people. Now, in the 50s, we start to see the new model unions. Remember, these are specific for certain skilled jobs, so more middle class or more affluent workers who have skills, like the Amalgamated Society of Engineers, set up in 1851. Because of this, we have then this infiltrating down and working downwards to influence the working class or the unskilled workers. And that was what we call new unionism. This refers to the unskilled workers mobilizing themselves after the example of the new model unions, such as the match girls and the dockers of 1888 and 1889. So this is where we are. And due to cases such as the toll puddle martyrs, remember when the men got sent to Australia, they got sentenced to transportation because they made a secret oath when they tried to push their farmer or their landowner into giving them higher wages. And because of the new union strikes of the 1880s, by the 1900s, trade unions have become a part of society and something the government can no longer just simply reject and kind of suffocate. You know, they have to face them, they have to accept them. Okay, so this leads us to a point where in 1926, Britain faced the biggest trade union action to date. Not only did it involve a strike coordinated by one group of workers, but it brought workers from different industries together in solidarity to support each other against the government. For 9 days, 1.7 million workers took to strike action. We'll go through the causes, events, and outcomes, which, remember, is a really good way to structure your thinking and your revision for the exam itself. Okay, so I'm going to start with the causes. Now, one of the main causes was that during the war, remember this happens in 1926, so we have had kind of in recent history the First World War. Now, during the First World War, the coal mines had become nationalised. Now, this meant they were run by the government. The government took all of these coal mines from private hands and ran them for centrally and kind of, ran them for the local mines. Now, this was because demand for coal was so great during the war. We needed so much coal to fuel heavy industry, which were needed to create the armaments. So it was in the government's interest to take these into government control. Now, what this meant was that when the mines were nationalised, inevitably the coal miners received higher pay because the government was running it. The government have a far superior bank of money to rely on. They can pay better wages. There was motivation and incentive to keep the coal miners happy, to keep them optimum in terms of their output, to help the war effort, and they were obliged to invest money into it because it was a nationalised industry. So during the time of the war, the coal miners received higher wages. Now, during the war, UK coal output had been 75 million tonnes. However, by 1920, it had dropped to just below 40 million tonnes. after the war, against the wishes of the coal miners themselves, the mines went back into private hands, and there was a fall in demand for coal. This meant that private owners, were forced or decided to shut down mines that were inefficient, that weren't making enough money or enough coal, and therefore focus their attention and their money on mines that did have a strong, efficient output. This obviously meant that people were being made redundant, were losing their jobs and their livelihoods where these mines were being shut down. It also meant across the UK, lots of people were made redundant, and the coal miners started to bring in new machinery which could replace jobs and therefore save them money, much like what happened in the factories and the industrialization. Now, all of this is, I guess, good for the coal mine owners, but not good for the people and the miners themselves. Furthermore, a final factor that was making this really difficult was foreign competition. At this point, mines in Germany had more modern equipment and were owned by companies that could invest lots of money. Now, I'm going to speak very, very briefly about Germany for kind of a grade 9 detail just now. Okay, so a couple of moments in the video, I'm going to go through some grade 9 snippets, some really important bits that if you really want that highest grade, you really need to at least try to understand. So part of the reason why Germany had become much more of a foreign competition by the 1920s was that in 1923 and 1924, we had the Dawes Plan. Now, this allowed Germany to re-enter the international coal market. It was an agreement between America, France, and Germany to try to save Germany as such. After the Treaty of Versailles, the reparations that Germany were being forced to pay and the lands they had lost in very industrialized land in places like the Ruhr were meaning that it was becoming very, very difficult for them to kind of recover. We know, well, you might know if you study Germany, they have the Great Depression and hyperinflation and things like that. So Germany needs help, and the USA come up with a plan called the Dawes Plan, where they allow Germany to send coal to France as part of their reparations. Now, this meant obviously that if Germany were providing free coal to France, English coal was not in demand at all, and it pushed the prices lower. So that's how the Dawes Plan affected the English coal market. Now, because of this whole situation, we see a process which starts now and is effectively a bit like a battle. The mines take action to reduce wages, increase output, because financially they feel like they need to. Trade unions respond saying this isn't okay. And this is effectively what happens for the next kind of couple of years until we reach 1926. Now, the first tension point that we reach is what we come to know as Black Friday in 1921. Now, this is not where you suddenly rush to the shop and buy all of these great deals on offer. It actually refers to the 15th of April 1921. Now, the working day had been extended and wages had been lowered by the coal mine owners. And the miners, by this point, wanted to go out on strike. They called on the Trade Union Congress, or the TUC, to call other industries out on strike in solidarity with them to make a real impact. However, at the last minute, the Railway and Dockers Union pulled out. They did not feel the same immediate concerns as the miners and were not as worried for their jobs. This meant the miners felt they had no option but to go back to work with longer days and lower wages. And this is the satirical cartoon behind me shows a miner who has died and the TUC who have abandoned them effectively to their fate. Now, the next big event was Red Friday in 1925, so we're 4 years later. Now, the price of coal had fallen again, and mine owners had declared further changes to hours and pay. By this point, miners' wages had dropped from £6 to £3.50, so very significant decrease. The Prime Minister of the time was Stanley Baldwin, this is him here, who knew the unions would support the miners this time and was scared of a workers' revolution. At this point, remember, we are in a world where we are very, very fearful in the UK and the West of communism and the impact that will have, especially having seen the Russian Revolution. He agreed to a 9-month subsidy called the Samuels Commission. The job of this was to negotiate an agreement between the mine owners and the miners. So it was a body who would then discuss between the two parties and reach agreement. It also created a body of money to be used to kind of supplement the miners' wages for the moment. It seemed as if Baldwin was just buying time so he could prepare the country for general strike if it was to happen. Now, a grade 9 snippet, the Samuel Commission concluded on the 10th of March 1926 that reorganisation and improvement of the mines was needed. It recommended a further 13.5% reduction of miners' wages. The mine owners declared the miners would be offered these new terms of employment, lengthening the day and reducing the wages. And this was the last straw for the miners. They had absolutely had enough. Their wages had been completely decimated, their days had been lengthened, they felt completely used by the system. And that's why by 1926, the TUC meet and we have the general strike.